Hello. My name is Dennise, and welcome to the first ever episode of Bizarre Bradley. This is going to be a podcast where we talk about the weird and unusual history of Bradley University. The entire world is filled with things that are unknown, weird, and just all around odd and bizarre. And Bradley is not immune to this wave of things. So I wanted to take a look at this type of history within Bradley because these aren't things that they're going to tell us at orientation when you first become a student. And they aren't going to teach this in history class to us. So it's our job to kind of go out and find it for ourselves. And I'm doing this for you. I'm finding some information and I'm going to present it for you guys. Every now and then I might have help researching, so I'll be sure to credit whoever helps me in the future. But for now, it's just me and you listening to this podcast. And we're going to go through the history of Bradley together. Before I get started in today's episode, I want to give a quick disclaimer. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only. I am not a historian by any means, and I gather all my information from online public resources. If you're interested in looking at the resources I used, we will be linking them in the description below this video or podcast, wherever you're listening to it, if you want to take a look and see if there's anything I left out or do your own research. Alright, so today we will be talking about the Bradley Hall fire, but before I get into that, I want to talk about Lydia and who she is. I know some of you are probably wondering, why am I talking about Lydia? But Lydia is a very interesting and important person in Bradley's history, and sadly, I don't think I could find enough information on her to really make an episode of her own, so I'm going to fit it in with this first episode just because I feel like it ties into Bradley Hall and a little bit of the stuff I'm going to be bringing up later in the episode. So we're going to talk about the history and who is Lydia Moss Bradley. Lydia Moss was born in the early 1800s and she grew up on a plantation in Indiana. Lydia was not a fan of slavery. In fact, she was adamantly against it. So it does appear that Lydia's family also may have been against slavery, though the details are not that clear. We do know that her father did give land rent-free to land workers because he didn't want to live off of slave labor. However, I don't know if he was still benefiting off of this free labor, only paying them with land. So I can't 100% say that he was like an awesome dude and was completely against slavery, but it is rumored that Lydia did use her house in the Underground Railroad. She offered up sanctuary to slaves who were running north in order to find freedom and escape slavery, which, go Lydia, honestly. This makes her more of a queen, in my opinion. When I learned this, I loved Lydia even more because that's something that you don't really hear about a whole lot of people doing in the 1800s. Like, obviously we knew it was a thing, but knowing the founder of our school did that really means a lot to me, and it sheds a new light on Lydia for me. I kind of just thought she was an old woman before, I'm not gonna lie. But this is why we're talking about her now, because she is such an awesome person, such as possibly helping slaves find their way to freedom. Now, in 1837, Lydia married a man named Tobias Bradley, thus changing her name to Lydia Moss Bradley. With Tobias, she had 6 children, however, they all passed away at young ages. I can't remember the exact date because age, because the sources seemed a little bit unclear, so I wasn't 100% sure, but I think the oldest age any of them lived to be was like 14. Which, that must be really hard, because losing a kid, no matter their age, is terrible for any parent, and I think that really shows the type of things Lydia went through growing up. And in fact, the death of her children is what inspired her and her husband to build the Bradley Polytechnic Institute. She wanted to build it in memory of her kids since they all passed away young. But before this, she began running a business with her husband. She actually did become a millionaire running this business. She very quickly made $1 million, and then it doubled, and then it doubled again. Lydia was a millionaire. Even after her husband passed away, she continued doing this job and making more money, being a self-sufficient woman millionaire. And that's even more awesome because this was the 1800s. Like, you really don't hear about women millionaires in history, and knowing Lydia was a woman millionaire, like, the feminist in me is so happy. Like, that just makes her such an awesome woman. Again, I fell in love with Lydia doing this research. She is so amazing, in my opinion. With the money she raised, she decided with her husband to begin building the Bradley Polytechnic Institute, as I mentioned before, in memory of her kids, as they did not get to go to any form of schooling. However, Tobias would pass away before this was fully built, and she continued the construction of it after his passing, determined to get it finished in honor of her kids. On top of this, with all the money she made, she donated money to black churches in Peoria area and opened up the school eventually to all students who were wanting to come, whether they were poor, rich, black, white. It was open to everyone. Which, again, this is the 1800s or early 1900s. This is a very big piece. The fact that she opened it up to everyone and she was donating her money to black churches and helping the black community in Peoria begin to thrive and find their feet here. Which, for it being the Victorian era, essentially, this is huge news. Like, Lydia was one of the leading figures for the area in allowing blacks to go to school and creating their own history and creating their own future, especially. Which, again, I will say it over and over again, Lydia is a queen. She made Bradley a more accepting place, and this is what she wanted, was for Bradley to be a diverse and accepting school. So, with this information, let's get into the Bradley Hall fire. It is a night in December 1963. It's the middle of the night, and Bradley just finished a basketball game when all of a sudden, commotion begins. It's dark outside, and you hear people screaming, yelling, and just complete panic, and say you go outside to try and figure out what's going on. This is when people began to notice that Bradley Hall was burning from the inside out. 101 firefighters came on scene and began to fight the fire. However, it was a freezing cold night, and the water from the hoses were instantly freezing due to how cold it was. In fact, I work a job where I call alumni here on campus, and there was one alumni who I ended up calling who was a student during the Bradley fire. He said he went outside and was watching them fight the fire, and he swore he almost had frostbite on his toes because it was so cold, but it was one of those things where everyone wanted to be outside. You know, we're people who are drawn to seeing disaster, like the looky-loo idea where we want to see what's going on. Like, you can't pull yourself away from it. And this is what happened. There were a lot of people outside, and I'm sure not all of them were dressed for such freezing temperatures. Bradley was completely burned except for the stone walls outside the building, and it was completely turned into what others described as an ice castle. I will hopefully have a picture in this. If not, if it doesn't work out, if I'm not able to figure out how to get a picture of the ice castle on this, there are pictures online if you just look up Bradley Hall fire. And no one knows what started the fire. The cause of the fire was ruled undetermined, but they were able to figure out that it started in the basement, which is actually where the student records were held, including the records of any black students who attended Bradley. So this is something that is talked about in a book describing the history of blacks at Bradley, which, again, I'm going to be linking a resource to that book to buy it and read previews of it in the description. And this just erased the records of blacks being at Bradley and Lydia's mark that she made here. And the fact that the fires ruled undetermined becomes very curious because it lost the grades, records, and just lost everything Bradley had, and teachers and offices had to move things, recreate things, like everything was gone, and it took forever to rebuild this building. In fact, even the midterm graduation was canceled for 1963. And an alumni who was supposed to graduate in 1963 was not able to walk the stage until 50 years later in 2013. Like, he graduated, he had technically the diploma, but he never got to walk the stage and have that experience all of us wish for when graduating, which I know some of us now can start to relate to this a little bit more now that we've lived through the pandemic, because I know we have multiple of hundreds of students who didn't get to walk for graduation due to the pandemic, including me and some of my peers. And I know there's those who didn't get to walk the stage of graduating high school. And now, having lived through a time where so many people understand this, it's hard to know that he didn't get to walk the stage. And it almost makes me wonder, are we going to come back 50 years later and ask our schools to let us walk the stage, give us the graduation we didn't get to have? So this is something very interesting. But that's really it for the Bradley fire and Lydia. They were both really short topics, which is why I kind of grouped them together. There's not a lot of information on the fire. There's no conspiracy theories of who started it, what's going on. It's just completely undecided and undetermined on what happened exactly that night. So maybe that's something you guys would like to talk about in like the comments or just bring up after listening to this, because I can't begin to formulate an idea in any way, shape, or form. I just know it was something I found interesting because I didn't know about the Bradley Hall fire until I was calling alumni, and I had met an alumni who graduated in like 1965, and he told me about it, and then I talked to my managers at work and they actually knew about it too, so that got me really interested. And the pictures of Bradley when it was a so-called ice castle was absolutely beautiful, to be honest. It's kind of like a dark beautiful, you know, where fire is just such a interestingly fascinating thing. Like, sometimes destruction can be beautiful, and I think it'd be cool to see Bradley as an ice castle again, as long as it's not like burnt down, because I want to graduate. I'm gonna be honest, I don't want to lose everything. But if they like sprayed hoses on it in the middle of the night, like put little sprinklers on it and turned it into an ice castle overnight, I would not complain if we had just like a little ice castle on campus, because it does look like a castle. I don't know what everyone else thinks, but that's what I kind of looked at it as. Alright, I know I ended this with a slight little ramble just because I'm excited and I'm learning how the heck to close these. So with that, I hope you have a wonderful day, weekend, night, morning, I don't know, whenever you're watching this. Good luck with classes or good luck with work, whatever you're doing. Just have a good life. I hope everything's awesome and stay bizarre. Thank you. Have a great day.